elections are also within the concept of the culture of peace building.
Right.
They focus on the national dimension.
Right.
So why this focus on election, and why this persistence of holding election, although even though there is no freedom of speech and everything that you just mentioned?
Right. Because elections have been constructed as the best way to promote peace and promote democracy. It's really, again, something that that you can see in the ideological environment of the post-Cold War era. Promoting democracy, holding elections has become synonymous with I'm going to start again, I can't. In the ideological environment of the post-Cold War era, holding elections has become synonymous with promoting democracy.
Yeah.
So international interveners, and especially those who are based in headquarters and national capitals, see the organization of elections as the best way to reconstruct a state and to promote democracy.
Because democracies are peaceful.
Because democracies are peaceful, exactly,
Yeah.
and because elections are the main tenet of democracy for them.
Yeah, okay. So back to these local tensions.
Right.
What do you think are the main local tensions that have been overlooked by international peace builders?
Well, there are many. There are really, really many. I think the first thing to clarify is what I mean by local tensions.
Yes.
So I really mean tensions at the level of the individual, the family, the clan, the municipality, the district, or the ethnic group, sometimes the ethnic group, but usually something at the provincial level or below. And when you want to try to think about the different categories of local conflicts and the most important ones, it's useful, I think, to think about political conflict, political conflict, social conflict, and economic conflict.
Yes.
So examples of political conflicts, and the most important ones, I think, from what I've seen and from what people have told me on the ground, are all the conflict about traditional power and administrative power at the local level. So in the Congo, there is enormous conflict, enormous tensions to determine who will be chief of village, chief of territory, chief of district according to traditional law, who will be the highest ranked family or clan or ethnic group in a given area. And these conflicts have led to violence many times in the past in the Congo, and they continue to lead to violence many times right now. And on top of that, the war has added another layer of complexity. Now there are tensions and there are conflict between the authorities that were in place before the war and the authorities that were put in place by various armed groups during the war. And on top of that, again, there is a lot of tension over who can be appointed to local administrative positions.
Okay.
Okay, economic?
Yes.
So economic, people talk a lot about the illegal exploitation of natural resources and how it motivates a lot of violence and a lot of fighting. And that happens for sure at the local level, at the village level, at the district level. But people usually don't talk that much about land. And to me, that's one of the main economic sources of violence at the local level, because land is extremely important. You wanted to say something?
As in for agriculture?
Exactly, land for agriculture. Because land for agriculture, it's actually the primary means of survival for Congolese, for most Congolese families. And also land has a symbolic dimension. It provides your status as a member of the community, as an important member of the community because you own land. So it has this symbolic social dimension. It's not only economic. So because of this economic and social dimension, there has been a lot of conflict over land in the past in the Congo. And these land conflicts continue up to now. And they are at the sources of many of the small-scale and large-scale conflict that have continued during the war and that continue now.
So, according to you, local tensions would be more about land than natural resources?
Depends where.
Yeah.
It really depends where and who you're talking about, depends in which village, depends for which clan, depends for which family. So it's impossible to say in general X
okay.
or Y.
Yeah.
But my point is just that land issues are extremely important.
Yeah.
And that the few people and the few agencies who have tried to quantify the number of conflict and to quantify what was the sources of this conflict, they actually found that land was a more important source of conflict than natural resources. Again, it's so difficult to find information on that I don't know how reliable these kind of studies are, but they are useful. They give us a sense of what is important, and they give us, they give us a good indication that land is extremely important as a source of conflict. I can also talk about social conflicts if you want.
Yes, and then yes, of course. So.
Okay. Social conflicts, still talking about local conflict. Think about in the Congo, a lot of young people, especially young men, and women, they are extremely poor. They have no education, they have no training, they have no profession. So they don't really have a status in the traditional order. And they also don't have means of survival because they can't own land because there is a land crisis. So the best way for these young people to survive, to have a status and to have something to eat, is actually to be a member of a militia or to be a leader of a militia. So there are important social motivations, local, individual social motivations for people to enroll in armed groups.
Yeah. So, the United Nations, as we know, is not a neutral body. A lot of powerful member states have their own national interests at heart.
Right.
For example, it is well known that the US has been backing Rwanda for many, many years now. Also, MONUSCO has a clear political agenda because it is backing the Congolese army to defeat so-called rebel groups.
Right.
So, for the purpose of your book, you have conducted over 300 interviews, some of which with the local population.
Right.
So, could you tell us how is the United Nations and MONUSCO in particular viewed by the local population?
Well, again, it depends who you're talking to. It depends which armed group, which political group, which villager, which ordinary citizen, to whom you're talking to. If you want to think about general trends, what I thought was really interesting was the difference between how MONUSCO was perceived when it arrived about 10, 12 years ago, and how it is perceived now. So when it arrived, MONUSCO was set up in '99, and then people started arriving on the ground and deploying on the ground in 2000, 2001, slowly. And then at that time, when you were talking to people, there was an enormous, MONUSCO was super popular. People had really, really high opinion of MONUSCO. Well, it was MONUC at the time, of the United Nations mission in Congo. There were huge expectations. There was the idea that finally the United Nations was coming, that they would help resolve the conflict, and that everything would go well. So the United Nations and all international actors in general, non-governmental organizations, as much as the United Nations, everybody was very popular. Like, we were the friend of the Congolese, and everything would go well, and people were very welcoming and very happy to see NGOs and to see United Nations peacekeepers on the ground. And then progressively, people started being disappointed because basically because the United Nations and the NGOs didn't meet all the expectations that Congolese people had. They saw this enormous United Nations peacekeeping mission in their village, and still the violence was continuing, and still the poverty was still there, and still the abuses, the human rights abuses, were ongoing on an everyday basis. So there was a huge sense of disappointment. And now when you're on the ground in the Eastern Congo notably, and you speak to people about the United Nations, they're extremely disappointed, they're very angry, and the United Nations peacekeepers are extremely unpopular, extremely unpopular. And so what you hear hear are all kinds of accusations that they don't do anything, they waste resources, they traffic mineral resources, they abuse girls, they do that, they are pro-Rwanda, that they are pro-Congolese, that they are pro the enemy, whoever that is. And so you have the feeling now that the United Nations, and I mean I have the feeling that now the United Nations and the United Nations peacekeeping mission have become the scapegoat. So for the Congolese and for the international actors, including the non-governmental organizations, every time something goes wrong, you will see all the media, everything will be, oh, MONUSCO didn't do anything, the UN peacekeepers didn't do anything, as if it was the responsibility of the United Nations mission.
So are any of these accusations actually true?
Most of the time, no. You have individual members of the peacekeeping mission who abuse girls, who have engaged in sexual abuse, who have engaged in armed trafficking, who have engaged in illegal exploitation of resources. But these are really, really isolated cases. In general, people who are there on the ground, they're really trying to do something.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work very well.
Yeah. Can you expand a little bit on the UN's intention in the DRC, with the background of various member states having their interest? Is the UN there for genuine reasons?
I think it's very difficult again to talk about the UN's intentions because the UN is a conglomerate of so many different agencies, units, subunits, and people from different parts of the world that it's difficult to talk about one general UN view. There are what the UN tries to do. I mean, the sense that I have is that people just try to fulfill their mandates. So when the mandate is support the Congolese army, support the Congolese government, whether they like it or not, they're going to try.
Yeah.
They may not try hard, but they're going to try. And you still have people within the United Nations in different agencies who are, let's say, they're French, and they're going to try to help advance the agenda of France, or they're Americans, and they're going to work, to promote the agenda of their country. But I don't think that as an organization you can really say the United Nations is trying to promote the agenda of the United States or trying to promote the agenda of France, as you hear very often on the ground in Congo.
I also remember reading from your book that there was suspicions towards MONUSCO because the head of MONUSCO was a US citizen.
Right.
Can you expand a little bit on this suspicion and this accusation of the UN being US biased?
Again, it's the kind of accusation that you hear a lot from expatriates and from Congolese, that because a certain person from a certain nationality heads the peacekeeping mission, therefore this peacekeeping mission, and because at the time when Swing, for example, William Swing was the leader of the peacekeeping mission, he was a former ambassador from the United States to Congo, so people were very suspicious that he would advance the U.S. agenda on top of doing his work for the United Nations. Again, there are these kinds of accusations all the times. Things may happen on an individual level, things may happen occasionally. I don't think that the end result is that the organization as a whole will advance the agenda of a specific country.
Okay.
And again, to me what's really, really important is not whether they're advancing the agenda of this country or that country. What's important is that whether they're advancing the agenda of the United Nations, the United States, France, the UK, they never consider local conflict. They never think about the importance of local conflict and local conflict resolution in advancing their agenda in trying to build peace in Congo. And to me, that's really the take-home point, is that no matter what they're trying to do, local conflict is completely beyond their radar.